Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. What if the greatest artistic genius of a generation was also a monster to the women he claimed to love? His name was Pablo Picasso, and this is a chilling account of how the most influential artist of the 20th century became a monster to the women he claimed to love. He saw them not as muses, but as raw material devouring their lives and souls to fuel his art, leaving behind shattered fragments of the people they once were. Picasso's life began not in a frenzy of creativity, but in a cocoon of privilege. Born in 1881 in Malaga, Spain, he was a prodigy from the start, a child who could draw with a skill that rivaled seasoned masters. His father, an artist himself, recognized his son's immense talent and devoted himself to cultivating it, sacrificing his own career to become his son's greatest champion. This early adulation instilled in Picasso an unshakable belief in his own genius, a conviction that would later manifest as a profound arrogance and a need for absolute control. He was seen as a genius boy, and the uncritical praise he received from his family, particularly his father, created a sheltered world where his talent was all that mattered. The world was his to conquer, and those around him were simply pieces in his grand design. As a young man, he moved to Paris, the artistic capital of the world, began to devour its culture, its chaos, and its women. Kay lived in a chaotic but vibrant world of artists, poets, and writers, but his relationships were always one-sided. Picasso would latch onto a woman, and for a brief, intense period, she would become his entire world, his muse, his lover, and a model for his work. His art would evolve with each new relationship, and the women themselves would become markers of his artistic periods, from the melancholy blues of his early career to the jagged, abstract forms of cubism. They were not partners in a journey. They were landscapes to be explored and resources to be exploited. The shocking reality of his genius was that it was inextricably linked to his cruelty, a truth most evident in his treatment of the women who became his muses. He saw them not as companions or partners, but as stepping stones on his creative journey. His first significant muse was Fernande Olivier, a beautiful model who he lived with for 7 years during his early rise to fame. She was his inspiration during his Rose period and his early Cubist experiments. But as he grew bored, he began to physically and verbally abuse her, locking her in their apartment and demanding total loyalty. He would throw tantrums, destroy his own works, and even threaten violence. His control extended to all aspects of her life, and she eventually escaped his grasp, fleeing in the night. When he moved on to his next muse, he did so without a moment's hesitation, erasing her from his life as if she were a discarded canvas. The art critics would celebrate his new style, not knowing that it was built on the emotional ruins of the woman he had just left behind. The chaos he reveled in stood in stark contrast to his next obsession, Olga Koklova, a refined Russian ballerina he met while designing the set for the ballet parade. Their relationship was a stunning contradiction. She wanted a respectable life of marriage and children, while he was a chaotic and unfaithful bohemian. They married in a grand ceremony, and he initially painted her with a new classical style that reflected her grace and elegance. But as he grew tired of her bourgeois desires, he began to mock her in his art, depicting her as a grotesque, clown-like figure with distorted features. The more she pleaded for a normal, stable life, the more his art rebelled against her. When she gave him a son, she had hoped it would bring them closer. Instead, it only gave Picasso another excuse to turn on her, as his art turned even more violent and aggressive. She was no longer a muse, but an obstacle to his creative freedom. After they separated, she spent the rest of her life trying to get him to see her and their son, living in a quiet state of distress and eventually dying a bitter and lonely woman. Just as Olga faded into a bitter memory, Picasso set his sights on his next victim, Marie-Thérèse Walter. She was a young, beautiful girl he encountered outside a Paris department store when she was just 17, and he was a married man of 45. Their relationship was kept a secret for years. She was a minor, and he was still married to Olga. Marie-Thérèse was a vibrant, joyful spirit and her youth and sexuality reignited his passion for art. She became his model for the Picasso Marie Thierry series of erotic and sensual paintings, a period of his art that was filled with light and joy. But once again, as his interest waned, he moved on, leaving her to raise their daughter alone, providing financial support but little emotional stability. Walter, heartbroken and unmoored by Picasso's departure, would eventually die by suicide. The tragedy of her life and that of his other muses is a haunting shadow over his art. His most famous and tragic muse was Dora Maar, a brilliant and accomplished surrealist photographer. She was his intellectual equal and a witness to his creation of Guernica, his most famous painting, documenting the entire process with her camera. But Picasso's emotional sadism was at its peak during their relationship. He was cruel and manipulative, often pitting her against Marie Therese and reveling in the emotional drama he created. He would later say, "I have to paint her crying. I am obsessed with her tears." And he did, painting her as a weeping, tortured figure in a series of disturbing portraits. He once described his women as goddesses or doormats, a telling phrase that summed up his inability to see them as equals. His relentless psychological torment drove her to the brink of insanity. After their tumultuous relationship ended, Maar suffered a mental breakdown and spent years in psychotherapy, her artistic career and mental health shattered by her time with the man she loved. While he continued to create masterpieces, her own talent withered in his shadow, a silent casualty of his genius. She spent the rest of her life as a recluse, haunted by the memory of the man who both made her famous and destroyed her. Picasso's final years were a chilling echo of his past. He married Jacqueline Roch, his last great muse, a woman 45 years his junior. He used his immense power and wealth to isolate her from her family and friends, demanding her complete obedience. She became a prisoner in his life, serving as his model and his caretaker until his death in 1973. He had a deep fear of aging and death, and he used her as a buffer against it, a final desperate attempt to control his world. In the portraits he painted of her, she is often depicted in a manner that seems to trap her in the frame, her gaze distant and hollow, as if a part of her spirit had been consumed. It was as though he painted her submission into the very fabric of his art. Her suicide, a few years after his death, was a final tragic footnote to his life, a testament to the immense emotional toll he took on the women who loved him. In the end, Picasso's legacy is a contradiction. He was a revolutionary artist whose work changed the world, but his personal life was a trail of wreckage and emotional destruction. The women he loved were his fuel, and when their fire was consumed, he would discard them and move on to the next. He would go on to be celebrated as a brilliant man and a master of his craft. But the women who built his art were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. The story of Picasso is a chilling reminder that the Cubist masterpieces that deconstructed the human form were perhaps just a reflection of the man who deconstructed the women he loved.